Today I'm going to solve a question that you and probably most other human beings have had at some point. And the question is, why did God create mosquitoes when they are so pesky and so irritating? How often have you asked yourself this question, right? Perhaps when you were getting bitten all over. It is one of the most irritating things in life, and there's not really much you can do about it sometimes. The earth that we live in now and that we know that we've always lived in is very different from the earth that God had originally designed and created. We often think that the earth kind of remained the same while man fell, and so we are different from the way man was originally intended to be. But that is not the entire truth. So what really happened? What really happened was that there were two stages of corruption that took place in the earth. And the first stage happened when the whole earth changed after the fall of Adam and Eve. Now, it was not only humans who lived from then on outside of the original pattern that God had intended. First, the right pattern was affected when Adam lost his dominion, so all creation lost its way. Now, when I say all creation, I mean mankind, animals, birds, trees, and everything that was created. So when we go to the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 20, it says, "Against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse." So mosquitoes, lions, every other creature had no choice. It was a consequence of the curse of God. It was against their will, and there was nothing they could really do about it. Now, the impact of the fall was very different for each creature. And we see this today also, right? So two people might be exposed to something that is not within the pattern of God, and they both react very differently. Take COVID, for example. Given the time we're in right now, two people might get it. One person might just have a cough and be okay in a day or two, but the other person might fall really sick and even die, as we've seen a lot. So people react differently to different things and are affected to a greater extent. Now, when we go to the book of Genesis, chapter 3, if you look at verse 14, God is speaking to the serpent, and he says, "Because you have done this, you are cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field." What is God saying here? God is saying that the cattle are cursed, every beast of the field is cursed, but the serpent is cursed to a greater extent. So what this says is that some creatures were affected more than others at this time. And God also says in Genesis chapter 3 verse 17, he's talking to Adam, he says, "Because you hearkened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded, saying that you shall not eat, cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow you shall eat of it all the days of your life." And he says, "Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to you." So even the ground was cursed, and when it cursed now, it started to react very differently. Now, it was never intended to bring forth thorns and thistles, but now it started to. So what we see is that there were some creatures that retained the original state in which they were created in, and there were other creatures that got messed up at this point and had some kind of change, whether to their external structures or to their internal systems. Because what happened was the original blueprints were now distorted. So the fall affected the very principles and the nature of the physical world. So if you check insects now, they are very helpful in many different ways, right? They draw things like nectar from flowers, and and they produce food out of that. Insects are helpful in things like cross pollination. They even produce silk, right? We get silk from the silkworm. But the story of the mosquito now is a different one. The mosquito was messed up, and it diverted from its true nature. So what happened was, now mosquitoes, they began to go after blood instead of what they should have been doing like the other insects. See, God in his original design, he would never give an insect that was supposed to be under the dominion of man the ability to suck life out of him, because that's what they do, right? Remember, life is in the blood. So this is a sign now that the earth was starting to go off course. Also, we know that only female mosquitoes bite people and not the males. There are different theories put forth for this, but it's recorded fact, right? And also studies show that pregnant women attract twice as many mosquitoes and are bitten, obviously, twice as many times as well. Now, this is because the pattern of the cause of the fall is reflected in the outworking of things after the fall. Let me say that again. The pattern of the cause of the fall is reflected in the outworking of things after the fall. So now when God is speaking to Eve in Genesis 3 verse 16, he says, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and so on. So the sorrow and the pain is going to be multiplied, but it is going to be multiplied in more ways than we think, because remember the point I just made about how the mosquitoes bite people. So that was the first level of corruption, but then there is now a second level of corruption of the created order. So if we go to the book of Genesis again, chapter number 6, God is talking and he is repenting that he had made man on the earth, and it says it grieved him at his heart. And God said, I will destroy man whom I have created off the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repented me that I have created them. And it says, God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. So God now says to Noah, the earth is filled with violence. The earth is filled with violence, and the end of all flesh is come before me. And it is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So we know that this was the time when fallen angels and their offspring, the Nephilim, had corrupted the earth and the bloodline of man as well, with the exception of Noah and his family. So the fallen angels brought a further level of corruption of God's order in three ways. Number one, they introduced intra-breeding of animals among animals to create crossbreeds within a species. That was number one. Number two, they also introduced intermingling of species, where one animal intermingled with another. For example, the horse and a donkey were mingled to create a mule, which doesn't really exist outside of that. And the third level was when they themselves intermingled with animals, with humans, and with other creatures on the earth to create other beings that were a hybrid of angels and these created entities. And since they were not 100% earthly because of the angel DNA, they created a very different class of creatures, like, for example, mermaids, right? Now, understand that Moses was a man of revelation. He was such deep in revelation that he was even able to find grace in a time when grace had not yet been introduced. And how did he do this? By revelation. It's in the same way Abraham also caught a revelation of the New Jerusalem ages before John received his revelation of this city. Now, coming back to Noah, he also uncovered other revelations through mysteries. So when we look at the book of Genesis in chapter 7, it says they're entering the ark, right? It says Noah went in, his sons, his wife, and his son's wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Now listen closely to what it says. It says, of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth, they went in two and two unto Noah into the ark. And when Noah came out of the ark, in Genesis 8 chapter 20, it says, and Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So what this says is, now there were clean and unclean animals, and clean and unclean birds. And Noah received this revelation. We can go to Leviticus and see that when the laws were given, the animals were defined as clean and unclean, but Noah's time was much before Moses came on the scene. So this had nothing to do with the law. Noah uncovered a revelation as to which were classified as clean and which were classified as unclean. So this is how we know which ones were retaining the original design versus those that didn't. Now, before the flood, there were also certain animals that existed that did not exist after the flood. We don't see them later. So God removed some animals at this point, never to appear again. So what this means is that animals had a role to play in the original design, but due to the corruption, this earth was not suitable anymore, and not suitable anymore for them and for what they would have done. For example, unicorns were on the earth at that time, but we don't see them after that. Now remember, Job lived way before we think he lived, because the arrangement of the books in the Bible is not chronological, right? So when we go to Job now, chapter number 39, when God is having this discourse with Job, he's talking to him and he asks, will the unicorn be willing to serve thee or abide by thy crib? Can you bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Will you trust him because his strength is great, or will you leave your labor to him? And he says, will you believe him that he will bring home your seed and gather it into your barn? So God is talking to Job about a unicorn in a very familiar way that Job would easily understand, saying that the unicorn is not an animal that can do farm work or one that you can domesticate and so on. And also when we go to the book of Isaiah chapter 34 in verse 7, it says, and the unicorns shall come down with them, and the bullocks with their bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. So it's talking about the unicorn as a physical animal with blood. And if we go to the book of Psalms in Psalm 29 verse 6, it says, he makes them also to skip like a calf, Lebanon and Syrian like a young unicorn. So it also shows that they are four-footed beasts. Now the unicorn still exists today, but we can no longer physically see it in the earth realm today. They exist in the spiritual realm now, and others who may also have had the grace to see might have seen them. Remember in Genesis, the animals and birds, they came out from a portal underneath the waters. So they came from another realm wherein they still exist today. Now, moving on, if we go to the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 19, it says, "For the earnest expectation of the creation awaits the revelation of the sons of God." So, who are the sons of God now? We are the ones who've been given the power to become sons of God. Right? John 1:12 says, "As many as received him, to them he gave the power to become the sons of God, even to those who believe on his name." So when you believe in him, you have the power to become the sons of God. You're not automatically one. You just have the power to get to that point. But in reality, very few actually become the sons of God. In Romans 8:14 it says, "As many as are led by the Spirit, they are the sons of God." It's a very different thing to have the Spirit in you versus being led by the Spirit. And notice it says this has to be by a revelation, because creation awaits the revelation of the sons of God. Now, the past sons of God in Genesis chapter 6, those angels were called the sons of God. The past sons of God corrupted creation, and the present sons of God have the power to do something now. And what do they have the power to do? When you look at verse 21 of Romans 8, it says that creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. For we know the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now. So until now, this is not a future event, but now we have the ability to be revealed as sons of God and tap into those original patterns and the original dimensions. Even 1 John 3:2, it says, "Now we are the sons of God, and it does not appear yet what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him. Now we are the sons of God." So let me give you an example. In the original pattern, original creation, trees were very different. Trees could move, trees could walk, and they could move even though they were in one place. But after their fall, they closed up, and trees could also speak with the tongue of trees, because everything has its own tongue, every creation. Now, one who has entered into the dimension of a son of God can tap into those original dimensions. If you go to the book of Mark, chapter 11, this is referring to Jesus, right? He sees a fig tree far away, and he comes close to it, wondering if he will find any figs. And it says, when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs had not yet come. And it says, "And Jesus answered and said unto it, Let no man eat of your fruit hereafter forever." Now notice it says Jesus answered. Nobody answers without a question. So there was communication between Jesus and the tree. The only person who just answers out of thin air is a mad person, because they're just talking to themselves. Now Jesus is the Son of God, so he could tap into the original dimensions. If we now check in Mark 4, around verse 39, during when the storm was happening on the sea, Jesus arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" And they feared exceedingly, and they said one to another, what manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? So Jesus rebuked the wind and spoke to the sea, and they obeyed. This means that they also had an ability to hear him. Now, ears are not the only way you hear, but they are merely the physical way of hearing on this earth. When the Holy Spirit speaks, for example, he speaks to your spirit, and you have to be well connected in order to pick that. And even when you communicate with angels, it's not through your mouth and ears for the most part. You communicate telepathically, right? You speak with your mind and you receive what he says in your mind as well. So there are many different ways to hear, not just with your ears. Another example, this is an interesting one. If you go to Mark chapter 8 now, it says, it's talking about Jesus again, it says he came to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man to him now, and they asked him to touch the blind man. But it says, and he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asks him, do you see anything? Now watch this carefully. What it says is, the man looks up and said, I see men as trees walking. I see men as trees walking. After that, he put his hands again upon his eyes, and he made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. So what's happening here? Does Jesus not know how to heal? Did he make a mistake? No. What happened was that Jesus had so much power that when he opened the man's eyes, he actually opened it in the original dimension. Now, why does the man say, I see men as trees walking? How did he have knowledge of that, having been blind all these years? Because he received understanding of that original dimension as well when he received vision of it. Remember, there is no veil in the spiritual realm. You are imparted understanding, and nothing is hidden, so you just know. So when spiritual eyes are open, it's not just you see into the spirit realm and that's it. There are levels, there are dimensions and realms that you can grow and see in, and not everything is just one standard, one size fits all spiritual vision. But Jesus couldn't leave him in that dimension now, or else he would never have been able to live a normal life. So Jesus tries again, and this time they were opened in the right dimension. If you go to Revelations 22, in the beginning of the chapter, it says, and they showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb, in the midst of the street, and on either side of the river was there the tree of life. On either side of the river was there the tree of life. Now, have you ever heard of one tree being on both sides of a river? Not really, right? So the trees that we see now and that we have now are different from what the trees are supposed to be and what they were and what they will be. So this is how Noah called all the animals from all over the earth. Remember, there is no distance in the spirit, so he could communicate from one end of the earth to another, but he still needed the right tongue for the right animal. Remember that everything that is created by God has a spirit and a tongue. So when you come to this place, to this dimension where you can become a son of God, you can now operate in this original paradigm and the original pattern of creation. Complete redemption of creation to the original pattern will not occur now, just as we are waiting for the redemption of our bodies to manifest, which will happen later. But even though the complete redemption cannot occur now, when the sons of God are revealed to creation, then we'll be able to tap into that which we were. So you have more to blame Adam and Eve for than you think. And every time a mosquito bites you, remember the depth of what's happening there. And what I would also say is, desire earnestly to become a son of God. Move from being just a child. And this starts by having a deep fellowship, understanding, and intimacy with the Holy Spirit, as well as subduing your flesh, so that you are truly led by the Spirit and you can truly become a son of God. May you have that desire, and may you grow deeper and higher in the spiritual things of God. God bless you.